There is a really interesting New York Times story that was out this week about boys, saying essentially boys have been behind in school, behind girls, and that starts way earlier, I think, than people presume, back in kindergarten. It made me think about all the talk that we have about how men are feeling about this economy, about society, and the fact that they feel behind. And maybe it's starting way earlier, and all of you guys have boys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got four of them, and I've lived through the kindergarten years with them in different ways. I had two that were going through that period during the COVID shutdowns.
Yeah.
My oldest, actually, we went through the kindergarten first grade phase and discovered he had a learning difference. And so that was obviously leading to some difficulties in the classroom at grades where you don't expect that much anxiety in the classroom.
Yeah.
So I've witnessed this, I've lived it, I've experienced it, and my experience has been that schools don't often find the correct way to instruct individual kinds of students, whether they have a learning difference, whether they have, whether it's just behavioral changes or differences between boys and girls, that schools are often trying to find a one-size-fits-all solution for groups of kids when those solutions may not be best for everybody, and it's really then up to the parents to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, I completely agree with you, and I have a 10-year-old. He is on the spectrum, and what I have loved about the public school we're in is there is that individual attention.
Are you in Nest?
But but what's interesting is, even when he was young, like preschool, there was this mantra from teachers and just other parents: boys develop later than girls.
Yes. Oh, I mean, I see this with my friends all the time. Yeah.
And they use it to sort of explain, like, well, girls are already more mature. Boys are developmentally behind. And I think it's something we all just like buy and accept.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that that's like the best message.
Well, I have a girl. I don't have a boy. But I will say, like, my daughter is very, like, for her age, is very developed. And I have friends who have boys, and they're not really on the same level.
You can see it.
And you can see it. But the difference to me with that is, like, maybe that's true, but maybe it is also true that kids, boys and girls, in kindergarten and in preschool need to spend more time being kids.
Playing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And and by the time they get to a place where they need to be academic, they have learned to learn the way that they learn best when they're young, which is by playing. And that's not really happening in the schools
There are a
anymore.
couple of things I would say about that. Yeah, I have one boy, Stokely, who is, I call him Man. He's my best friend in the entire world. 6.5 years old. And I know that we all have that type of admiration. So there are a few things that I would say. One, culturally, as you pointed out, there are some stigmas in place that just aren't applicable in 2025 anymore. The way that boys deal with emotion, and the way that boys will be boys, for example, that you hear that all the time. Oh, boys will be boys, or they develop slower. I mean, we just have to break out of those norms. And even more, as someone who's raising a black boy in this country, for me, it's filling that house with love every single day. It's ensuring that he knows his value and self-worth. But it's also understanding that, culturally, there are a lot of black men in particular who do not allow boys to show emotion, so allowing Stokely to do that. But all of that ties into what you're talking about. It ties into those trends. And so I think we have to do a better job, Democrats, Republicans, white, black, whatever, of allowing these young boys to grow up into men. And we are failing at that.
But the individual, to Scott's point, the individual part is so important.
So
because
important.
boys will be boys, that's another generalization.
Yep.
My boy doesn't want a rough house like the other boys.
I mean, that's what I'm saying.
Because of his learning differences and neurodivergence, he doesn't interpret that as friendly play. He is really put off by that. And so I think all the stereotypes around how boys are and girls are should be challenged so that we're talking about, well, that's how this kid is. And it's different from how this kid is.
Well, this is getting pushed all the way up the educational spectrum. So, you get to the university level, there are more girls than boys in American universities. And this was a conversation around HBCUs at places like Howard University. Way more girls than boys.
Way more.
So it's starting in kindergarten, and by the time you get to college, you have way more college-educated women than men.
I would be remiss.
That has
Abby,
economic impacts.
I would be remiss if I didn't. My son goes to a public school, and we dare not mention where it is because Scott, Essie, John, and Abby, we all live in this crazy environment where you should not say where your kid goes to school. But I'm sure Scott does this. I'm sure we all do this. We find ourselves proverbially stepping in the gap for, particularly me, other parents who are not there. For other, there are a lot of children in my community that don't have a father figure, right? And so you find yourself leaning into that. And so when you talk about things like that, that's not taboo to say. That's not something we should not talk about. There are a lot of men, black men in particular, for various reasons culturally, who are not in the home. And you have to be willing to talk about that and tackle that. And so I find myself having that discussion of how I lean into being there because, individualism matters, but there are also these cultural issues that matter too.
And this is also an issue very close to my heart as the father of a boy who goes to public school in New York City, in Harlem. And this is how it was when I was a kid. The girls were ahead. The girls had their act together more. I think this is how it is on most levels of society. At some point, the men control it all. The women have their act together more. I found this story interesting because I just thought, well, but girls are ahead. Maybe that's just how we develop, and people are freaking out because it's supposed to be boys, but we have to acknowledge that boys don't develop and grow and learn the same way that girls do.
Yeah.
And as we become more empathetic and more understanding of children and the brain, we can go ahead and try alternative forms of learning because young men need love. And if we want an America where adult men can give love, we need to give extra love to boys right now. If we don't, they're going to get cast aside, and the internet will raise them.
That's such a good point because, I mean, you talked, Bakari, about stereotypes, but I do think we have to acknowledge that it's more than stereotypes. Like, we understand that men's brains and women's brains develop differently at different stages, especially in their early 20s, that boys just need more time for their brains to fully develop. So some of that is happening, and I think the question then becomes, what are we as a society doing? Are we then taking that reality and then saying, well, that means that you're just going to be behind forever? And I think that is really that's really the issue.
So one thing that, if I had any advice for parents, is that if someone in your educational journey ever tells you, you know what, they'll grow out of it. Do not listen to this advice. We were told that.
Right.
It's not necessarily true. Probably not true. Don't necessarily just continue to punt conversations in your own household about what's going on. If we had done that, we would have missed significant amounts of time in getting learning differences corrected.
Right.
And so, but I unfortunately think that is sometimes the default in some educational situations. You know what? They'll grow out of it. And maybe some do, some don't. And if you let that sort of dictate your course of action, it may not turn out the way you want.
Well, and that's a story of resources as well. Like public school, we are so lucky. We have an incredible public school system that identifies these challenges very early, tailors curriculum to each individual student. That's a public school. That is not every public school. And a matter of resources, resources matter when you're talking about, too few teachers to students, and that's when you get the he'll grow out of it because I don't have time to really deal with the issue.
Well, guys, this was a great conversation.
Okay, good.
We should continue it,
Yes.
but in the meantime,
Clink.
cheers.
Cheers.
To smaller classes.
Well, to smaller classes.